Cathaoirleach. Minister, can I ask you about your plans to recognise representative associations for members of the Defence Forces and to allow such bodies to join their union and to be recognised as part of the ICTU? And if you'll make a statement on the matter, please.
Minister, you have 2 minutes.
Section 2(3) of the Defence Forces Amendment Act 1990 prohibits the Defence Forces Representative Association being associated or affiliated to any trade union or any other body without the consent of the Minister. Members of the Defence Forces also cannot become members of the trade union. To compensate for these limitations, there are a range of statutory redress mechanisms available to serving members, including redress of wrongs, a Defence Forces Ombudsman and a conciliation and arbitration scheme for members of the Permanent Defence Force. In 2017,
I think probably the thing that jumps out at me in your answer is that they cannot affiliate to trade unions without the consent of the Minister. And this is the question. Why is the Minister not willing to consent? And I think we need to tease that out, because this has gone on for very, very long. And in the meanwhile, the Defence Forces are hemorrhaging and finding it really difficult to retain people. The figures for the amount of people who left the force between, in this year alone, 256 discharges for the first 4 months of 2019, the highest figure since the reorganisation of 2012, and in April alone there were 86 discharges. And it's worth reminding ourselves that each of these costs an individual €300. So I think you're burying your head in the sand not to acknowledge that, despite some recent acceptance of a pay offer, that the problems inside the Defence Forces run very, very deep indeed and are not being resolved, and that soldiers and sailors and others in the Navy, etc., believe that their best chance of representation is with their union and the ICTU, and they have committed to the understanding that they would not take strike action.
Thank you, Deputy Minister, to reply.
Deputy, I don't accept any of your comments at all, because I was the Minister who asked during the CNA review, the independent CNA review scheme, as part of the terms and conditions and terms of reference of that review, I asked the independent chair, Mr Barry, to look at ICTU affiliation for members of the Defence Forces, and that was out of a decision from a Euromill case. So to say, Deputy, that I have been ignoring this issue, I have not been ignoring this issue. Actually, maybe if you read a little bit more and done a little bit more exploratory exploring, you might be able to find out my activity in this area. But what I am not going to do is to rush into a decision here. I'm giving this very, very careful consideration, because I have the advice of military management. I have that, and I will absolutely take that at face value. And
I'm sorry if you take it up that I'm saying you ignore the issue. I didn't say that. I said what you're not doing is given what you could do, which is the consent of the Defence Forces to be part of a trade union and part of the ICTU. There's been lots of talk about the issue. We've revisited it time and time again. There's been meetings and discussions, but it is within your gift to give the consent. And PDFORRA have given a commitment that they would not engage in strike action. Reference to RADCO is disingenuous, because they already are happy with the internal procedures and forums to address their grievances. So really what I want you to acknowledge is that whatever deals you have done recently will not address the gross underpay and poor conditions faced by Defence Forces personnel, and that their desire and expressed willingness to become part of the ICTU and feel that they be better represented in that way is not to be ignored. And I say this to you, particularly while we face climate chaos. The people we're going to rely on the most when we have flooding events, landslides, sea levels rising, storm events of a unique nature are going to be the Defence Forces. And if we're hemorrhaging members of that force and have a demoralised defence forces, then we cannot expect to get a full and proper service. Any threat to the security of the state, in my measure, because that's what's been used against allowing these workers join a trade union, has been the question of security to the state. The security to the state is at risk because we're hemorrhaging members of the defence forces, and particularly in climate chaos.